Boom! It's all over. Hello, I'm Kendall Brian Hunter, author of the book Consider My Servant Job, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. So today we are filming on location, and if you could see right through the fog behind me, that's the city of San Francisco. So I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area today on a fact-finding mission, and of course my commitment to you is to always do these Come Follow Me broadcasts, and so here I am on the beach with a San Francisco behind the fog. I have to say the diffused lighting is working really great for this video. But we're here to talk about the Old Testament. So first of all, just a reminder that I'm the author of the book Consider My Servant Job. We are coming up on studying the book of Job, and if you want to prepare with confidence, get a copy of my book. I'll put links below in the notes section so you can link to it and study the book of Job with a sense of confidence. So this is 2 Kings 17 to 25. It's boom. It's all over. We've been fighting an uphill battle, and finally you have the Assyrians and later the Babylonians, and Babylonians, not Babylonians, come in, invade Israel and the kingdom of Judah, and this is the scattering of Israel. So this is sort of a sad ending to what we've been trying to work for since the beginning. So keep in mind with this is one where you want to get your Bible dictionary out and get the maps out and pay attention to them. Remember that there's two kingdoms. There's a northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. So the kingdom of Israel is where you have the 10 tribes, and the 10 tribes live, and you have the tribe of Judah, and of course in the kingdom of Judah, and you have the tribe of Benjamin split between them, and the split came with Solomon's sons. There's a rebellion, and you get a situation like they had with the Jaredites. You always have two kingdoms fighting against each other, or with the Nephites and Lamanites, and it's a situation where there's just been total assimilation, where for the most part, both kingdoms become wicked. They adopted the religious worship and haven't been following the rites that Moses established. And at this point, God says, "Okay, game over. Everyone out of the pool." So in the first stage, remember, is that you have Assyria invades the northern kingdom, and that's where you get the lost tribes of Israel, our 10th article of faith. And they picked up, it's what they did in the olden days, is they'd have the population removal. They'd invade the people, then sort of transfer people. And this is where you get Daniel coming in, where he is a leader in the area. And as you have these invasions going on, he's taken back to to Babylon, Nineveh, these areas, and trained to be adopted into the court. And it was something that Russia did, or I should say the Soviet Union did, is when they invaded these other countries like the Baltic republics, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Latveria. They had go in there, take people out, put Russians in. The same thing. It helps us understand the war that's going on with Ukraine right now, that these invading armies would swap people around, and the purpose was to bring some stability to the newly conquered territories. If you brush up on your Machiavelli and the Prince, you learn a little bit more about this, but this is a Bible study. So what happens is that we start shifting to the kingdom of Judah, which is the southern kingdom. It's where the temple is located, and you have Hezekiah, who's a good king, and what he does is he bribes the Assyrians, and he gives them the doors to the temple. That's in chapter 18, verse 16, and gives them the vessels are in the temple just as a tribute. Say, okay, get off her back, we'll play ball with you. And the problem with that, they're trusting in riches and peace treaties and not trusting in God. And this is the time where you have the prophet Isaiah. So prophet Isaiah is just before the complete scattering of Israel, and he's a member of the court of Vizier, I believe, and he has an influence in the upper echelons, where you have some of the other prophets, or like Lehi, who's outside of the system, or Amos famously, who says he's not a prophet, not a son of a prophet. But Isaiah was with the rubbing elbows with the people, and what happens is that you remember the issue with Hezekiah, that he gets sick, and Isaiah gives him the prophecy. If you see the sundial move backwards, you get your life prolonged. And you'll see, this is also told again in the book of Isaiah. But Isaiah was not just a writing prophet like Moses, but he's able to work miracles like Elijah and Elisha. So you move on, you have Manasseh, where you have the relapse to wickedness, and you get that beautiful prophecy, the very tragic comic prophecy in 21:13 says that they'll wipe Jerusalem as a man wipes a dish. Then you have Ammon comes to power, quickly dispatched. And you notice the name Ammon, that's an Egyptian name, where you get these cross-cultural things. And that's one way you notice is with the way the names change and how people adopt names. For example, in South America, there's a lot of people named Ammon. That comes from the Book of Mormon. So the next kings, you have King Josiah, and that's where he's a good king. He goes back and works on rebuilding the temple, and during his administration, that's where they find the scroll with the rule of the law on it. And this is kind of interesting because some of the critics say, hey, this looks a little suspicious. Was this a pious fraud? Was this just a forgery that he created? And he went through all the trouble of creating this so he could establish a false claim. A good parallel is the donation of Constantine, which is a forgery, but it was thought to be real for a long time and later found out. But you have other forgeries. Mark Hoffman, when I was in high school, the big forgery, maybe it was a little bit earlier, they had the so-called Hitler diaries came out, and with someone just producing a forgery. On the other hand, if anyone who studied in archives, you know that things get misplaced. In fact, that's the thing with the Joseph Smith papers, is they're going back and trying to reconstruct stuff. They did a similar thing back in the 1930s when B.H. Roberts was writing the comprehensive history of the church and doing the history of the church, comprehensive history in the church. They noticed that some of the record keeping wasn't accurate. And that's one of the, just a little tangent here with studying church history. You didn't have professional historians with degrees in history who had training in archiving. You had a bunch of willing and talented amateurs doing this, many of them apostatizing. There's poverty issues, you're having mobbing issues, and there's just a lot working against the history. I mean, the miracle is that, very early on, Joseph Smith told people to keep journals, and that's one of the nice things about studying church history is you have a superabundance of journals. And we have a lot of insight into the early origins of modern-day church history, which you don't have with other areas compared that to other religions like Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. We actually have a lot of primary documents, so keep your journals and write your journals and make sure you're doing it as a daily exercise. Like I said, misplaced stuff happens. There's a lot of apostasy going on. There's having false idols in the temple. Some people think it's suspicious. I don't, just knowing from my experience with history and how things kind of worked back then. Another one is you have Huldah the prophetess going on there, and that's something that kind of gets a little bit politicized. But yeah, women were prophetesses in Israel. Isaiah's wife was one, Deborah was one, and Huldah was a prophetess. So you had women with a prophetic gift. Keep in mind that prophecy is a gift of the Spirit. It's not it's a priesthood function, but it's also a gift of the Spirit. So women can have the gift of prophecy or healing. And if you study the principle, you see what I'm talking about. It's true. But overall, going back to the overall, getting off the tangent, going back to the overall trend, is that you understand there's this zigzag going on. You have a wicked king, you'll have a righteous king, a wicked one, but the zigzagging process creates a problem. Now you contrast that with the Book of Mormon, where you had King Mosiah the First, King Mosiah the First, Benjamin and King Mosiah the Second, where you had three kings in a row who were righteous. In fact, they had the gift of seership. They're able to translate. King Mosiah the First translated the Coriantumber stone. King Benjamin is obviously righteous, as we know from his sermon. Then King Mosiah II had the seer stone and had the gift was a seer in addition to being a king, was able to translate the 24 jaredite plates. But you didn't have this in Israel, just the zigzag. You had the downward tug, and so finally things just crashed and burned. You have Jehoahaz, if I wrote that correctly. I'm doing this off the top of my head on notes and on vacation. And you have him making deals with Egypt, who is a closer, more powerful ally. So you have to understand, get a sense of the geopolitics. You have Babylon here in the Fertile Crescent in Assyria, Israel, Judah, then Egypt down here. And so they're trying to, they're in each other's service. in each other's sphere of control. So you get them to King Zedekiah, and this name should be familiar from 1 Nephi 1:4. That King Zedekiah was the king in the days of Nephi. And what happens is that during this day, Nebuchadnezzar raids the temple and the city. You just get the final wave in where they burn the temple. And during this time, you also had the Mulekites leave, who are the descendants of King Zedekiah. They leave in different waves than the Nephites do. But this is what happens. It's just over. That God says, okay, we've worked with you, and I have to draw a line somewhere, and this is where I draw the line. You understand this is the reason why we don't talk about unconditional love. There are conditions to what goes on. God will not put up with our nonsense. When we are being disobedient, we are hurting people, we're hurting ourselves, we're setting bad examples. It's what Steve Jobs called the bozo explosion, where if you allow one bad person at a company, it empowers other people to also be bozos, and pretty soon the entire standard's lower. But this is when we have to defer to God's judgment, love, and mercy, and righteousness, where it says, okay, this is the whole conditions are met, where it's time for people to get their clock cleaned. And it's not something we get off on or we laugh at, but we understand that that's an aspect of God's nature, where God says there are lines and there are boundaries and limits to what God does. And that's the sad story. And that's really one of the voices of warning that we read about. So let's come to the Christ quotient. And like I said, this is a little bit complex because you have the two kingdoms, you have the geopolitics, a lot of unusual names. But if you can understand Hogwarts and Elrod from fantasy or sci-fi novels, you should be able to handle these no problem. A lot of the question is what's the basis for a moral society? That I am using this book as a boost, but one of the questions is, if a society doesn't have a strong moral sense, it doesn't know if it's a good society, and it doesn't know if it's being helping people or hurting people. And the question is, which ethical system do we follow? Then in modern days, we have the problems like, okay, how do you handle this in a pluralistic society where you have a separation of, you have the Establishment Clause and the the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. I'm sure glad I brought this. That what exactly is a good society, and are we actually being a good society? Are we replacing institutional racism with institutional retaliation, and are we calling that better? These are questions, of course, we need to answer for ourselves, and also study the scriptures and see what patterns we can read about in all four books of Scripture. But is our society one where we can lead members to Christ? Are we being entering into appropriate political activity? What else is there? I think that's really it, is that you're understanding something about Jesus Christ here, is that he loves people, but he also is willing to draw the line, but also as we as members, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are having a good society where this stuff doesn't happen. And this is something that the proclamation talks about, is that about warning about the prophecies in the Old and New Testament, that if we allow the breakdown of the family. So it's something to think about, something to do your homework about, and it's something you kind of reflect on again and again. So I'm sorry this is not the best of all broadcasts, and even though the foggy scene, and yeah, honestly, that is San Francisco right behind me, and that may be sort of symbolic, are we fogging over our politics? Because the whole point of this is to bring people to Christ, and the point of good government is to bring people to Christ, even in a secular government. And how that works is allowing religious liberty, and religious liberty is how we come to Christ, and that is the point.